Hey, how's life? So I know I've got kind of several different things going on here. I've got the regular episodes, I've got the Sam Harris reading list, I've got the fun movie battle stuff in between, and now I'm adding another one. I'm reading the 100 greatest novels of all time. I found a list that was like a compilation of 140 different 100, best of novels lists. So I've been reading a bunch of those, and I figured I would talk at somebody about them, and so here we are. So I'm starting at number 100 and working my way up. Some of these I've read before, a lot of them I haven't. Some of them I hadn't even heard of. Number 100 was The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. And this was more than 1,000 pages, by the way. More than 1,000 pages. And I read every single one of those freaking pages. Doesn't mean I was totally conscious for a good chunk of them. There were some where I just blanked out, and they all start running together at some point. Because, so the way it's structured, it was written in 1353. It's happening, all this stuff's supposed to be happening around the Black Death. It's structured as it's 10 days, and each day 10 stories are told. So there are 10 people. There's 7 women and 3 men, and they each tell a story every day, and there are 10 days. So that is 100 stories, 100 stories that are told. They kind of fit within certain categories, but they're kind of all over the place too. I mean, for 100 stories, they introduce a different topic, as they're talking, they're like, oh, today's topic is going to be, and then each person has to come up with a story for that one. So it's, like I said, it's more than 1,000 pages. I read the whole thing. I have some notes here from, criticism. This critic specifically talked about the vicissitudes of fortune, that was a significant theme, just the way that fortune works, which, again, this is the 14th century, so this is when there's kind of a flowering. Anyway, so this critic was specifically talking about how this was trying to cover, the Decameron was trying to cover all of human life. It's trying to cover all the kinds of things that people get into. Critic said there were a couple of stories that baffled, but he found this a lot funnier than Dante. And I don't remember the hilarity of Dante. I don't think I ever finished Dante, so we'll get to that one though. It's on the list. Okay, so some analysis. So some readers think that Dionio is, and that's one of the guys, is actually the stand-in for Boccaccio himself. And he's like the wild card storyteller. He does what he wants half the time. He had a special rule that he could do what he wants. You've got the commercial and urban values of quick wit, sophistication, and intelligence. These are lauded over stupidity and dullness. But it's kind of a new mode of thinking. That's why it was so popular at the time. It exhibits a bunch of scorn for clergy, and this is in the early, the flowering of the Enlightenment and the Renaissance and that kind of stuff that was on the horizon. And it's kind of an early European humanist tradition. It's the burgeoning of that. So my kind of general thoughts about it. I think the prose in general, it's got that classical, overly written prose where it's just, you have these long sentences that just go on and on. You'll have whole paragraphs of sentences, and it's not the kind of pithy thing, we've come all the way to Hemingway, and it's not the kind of thing that is all that pleasurable to read. It's a little chunky, and it's not dealing with, and I'll talk about themes that I saw, but it's got kind of a general bigger ideas, but internally, really what it is, it's like a 14th century sitcom, it's a variety show that just has a bunch of funny stories that people are going to enjoy here and there, but you go and maybe you read them out loud. They don't have TVs or Netflix at the time, so you just read them to your family or whatever else one a night, and it's entertainment. It's fun. But some of the themes, one thing that was considered, it's got a really flippant idea of monarchy, because what they actually do is for each day, somebody gets to be the monarch, somebody gets to be the queen, so it's just passed around really flippantly. And I just wonder if that's some kind of an idea that it had about the frailty of monarchy, or that monarchy isn't, really isn't divinely ordained or anything like that. I wonder if that's kind of a progenitor of that kind of idea. And it was written in Italian. Hopefully grasp that from the name. But yeah, it was written in Italian. This is Italy. And so you've got, a bunch of the stories are just about, like I said, it's like sitcoms. It's all sex and debauchery, and a whole bunch of the stories center around those ideas. There are some that are like religious in tone and have religious ideas that they're trying to get across. They don't get deep into theology or anything like that, but there are some religious ideas that they try to get across. But the bigger idea that I thought about this book is that it's got a juxtaposition, because the way it starts out with the opening where the proem, it talks about the Black Death and what the Black Death was like and what was going on and people dying and being carted out into the street, and how all the regular things that were important, like the attractiveness of a woman or wealth or whatever else, those things are nullified by the Black Death. They're saying how people couldn't have enough money, or if they had so much money, they have to pay just an insane amount just to get somebody to come in and change their bedpan or something like that, And beautiful women with the plague just couldn't get, before the plague, they just couldn't keep men off of them, but once they're afflicted, then they can't, no matter how beautiful they are, they can't get that kind of attention anymore. So it's kind of talked about. And one of the interesting ideas it actually talked about was how all the functional parts of society, baker and not mechanic, but the person, the smith, the smithy, or whatever else. Like when people start dying, it's taking those chunks out of society. It's like your mail doesn't get delivered anymore because too many people have died in that arena. And so it talked about this idea of how just the functioning of society no longer works. And we don't think about it in those kind of terms. Even if there was some kind of gigantic outbreak or something like that, we think that, okay, well, yeah, a bunch of people have died, but we'll still have it functioning. If Safeway doesn't work anymore, then they're still giant. I can still go there. But it was kind of an interesting idea to think about. But the big idea here is that these 10 people, they're like privileged and they're trying to get away from the Black Death. So they go off into the country and they're just going to frolic and eat good food and tell funny stories until this whole thing passes over. And of course, in the proem, it talks about God judging people and all that sort of. There are a couple of quotes I have in here, but so it's got this juxtaposition of the most dire thing that you can imagine and just flippin' sexuality and funny stories and, nonsense. It's got this juxtaposition of those two things. So I think it's that kind of big idea that made it so resonant when it came to, the longevity of this book and this setup. Anyway, so some quotes. I think this is the first line in the book, I believe, and it's not the whole sentence, but a kindly thing it is to have compassion of the afflicted. So I like the first sentence of every book, so I do that for every book. I'm going to have the first sentence for each one. Not the first full sentence if it goes on for a page, but that's how it starts. Quote, another quote. But as it pleased him who, being himself infinite, hath for immutable law appointed unto all things mundane that they shall have an end. So just talking about God and how he decided to structure it that everything would have an end. And it's a powerful idea in this kind of a circumstance. And then, so it's the 14th century, and there are all sorts of polemics against women just throughout the thing. And the writer writes as mostly women, but he puts in the women's mouths all sorts of terrible stuff. Remember that we are all women, and none of us is child enough not to know how little reasonable women are among themselves, and how ill, without some man's guidance, they know how to order themselves. So this is a woman talking. This is a woman saying this at one point. There's another one. I mean, there are several others that I have in here, but you'll get the idea. Have always understood man to be the noblest animal created of God among mortals, and after him woman. What canst thou expect a woman naturally unstable to avail against the prayers, the blandishments, the gifts, and 1,000 other means which an adroit man who loveth her will use? So all sorts of anti-woman polemics in this. But curiously enough, it's often the woman that gets the better of whatever's going on in a lot of these stories. Okay, some other quotes. Let's see. Oh, there's some funny things. So, there are just a couple of things. I wonder if this is where these sayings originated. We have gone the wrong way to work. We have brought him forth of the frying pan and cast him into the fire. So I wonder if that's what that's from. Tell these cock and bull stories. I wonder if that from that. I don't know. But so one of the religious stories it's a really early one where it's got think it was 3 rings or something like that. There were 3 rings handed out, and one of them's the true one, but the other 2 are false. And it was talking about the different religions. So who has the correct religion? Is it the Christians, the Jews, or the Saracen, as they're called in here, the Muslims? And there's one, I think the funniest. So early story, and these are ones I remember. But so early story was one where this guy, he's dying and he's going through confession, and everything that he confesses just makes him sound amazing. It's like, but he really is absolutely horrible. He's got so many sins that it's ridiculous. But when he's going through this confession, then he'll say like, "Oh, I am as yet a virgin," and and he goes through a whole bunch of this stuff where he just finds ways to make it sound like he got into a fight, but really he was protecting a woman who was being beaten by her husband or something like that. So he goes through a whole bunch of this kind of stuff. And then he's given sainthood, and it's a cheeky little way to show kind of the hypocrisy or the nonsense of certain types of religion. I'm sure they were still religious in the 14th century, but they were calling into question a lot of that kind of stuff. And there's another one. All right, this one was pretty fun because it was talking about, like, there was a guy who was a Jew, and he was trying to figure out which religion was true, and a Christian was telling him, "No, come along with me, and you'll find, and I'll show you why this is the true one. Go to Rome and see the priests, and you'll see that this is the true one." So after he goes in and does this, he says, "And as far as I can judge, meseemeth your chief pastor, and consequently all the others endeavor with all diligence and all their wit and every art to bring to naught and banish from the world the Christian religion." Another quote, "And for that I see that this whereafter they strive cometh not to pass, but that your religion continually increaseth and waxeth, still brighter and more glorious." So based on this, he says that the pastors or whatever, the leaders of the religion are so absolutely horrible and sinful and do everything that they can to try to drive the religion to the ground because they're so terrible. But it doesn't. It keeps building and growing and everything, so it must be true. So that's his turnaround. This is a quote that just kind of exhibits the writing. "I blush to avow it, for that I cannot say aught against other women, but I say it against myself. These women that are so laced and purfled and painted and party-colored abide either mute and senseless, like marble statues, or, an they be questioned, answer after such a fashion that it were far better to have kept silence." So it's kind of the writing style, but more anti-woman stuff. So, later stories, like there's one, I remember there's one where like a lady's looking into it's so goofy. It's just like she's looking, her husband is in a tent or something, or he's looking in a chest, and the lady had a lover hidden in the room, but then the lover goes around and sneaks around and banging her from behind while she's talking to her husband, looking in the chest or the tent or something like that. So it's just that kind of stuff. There's another story where a guy was going to pay another guy to sleep with his wife. So it's that Demi Moore, Woody Harrelson movie. I don't know who else is in it. It wasn't Paul Newman. It was Robert Redford. That's who it was. Robert Redford was making the indecent proposal. There's some trash talking that I kind of like. "I shall hold thee a blockhead." That's pretty good. "Besotted dotard that thou art. Accursed be the wheel I have willed thee." So besotted dotard. I don't know if I'll use that, but "Thou sorry shitten cur." That one's pretty good. For a scurvy troll. That was kind of hard to... Scurvy troll, Trull. "As she must have to be a mind to so fine a jewel as that." Wow. Yeah, that one's a little tough. But there were, like I said, 100 stories. I absolutely promise I read every single one of them. I went through, it took me like 2 hours just to go through my highlights. And I didn't want this episode to be ridiculously long because I actually recorded this at one point where I was going through, in more depth, trying to talk about each, a story from each day and all that kind of stuff, or a couple of stories. And it was an hour and a half long. So I was like, I'm not doing that. I only do that for Disney movies, bro. But no, so I didn't want to go through all that. But you get the idea. I don't think that anybody needs to read this. Like, you can pick it up and read a couple of stories just to get an idea of what's going on, but I don't think that it has all that much wisdom. You should know about it. You should know how it's structured and all that, but it's like watching a sitcom, and for the time, it might have some kind of import, but really, I don't think anybody needs to read this freaking book. For the end, there's one idea in the conclusion. Who knoweth not that fire is most useful, nay, necessary to mortals? Shall we say, because it burneth houses and villages and cities, that it is not? So this is an idea there. And this is actually, the author is talking to you directly in this. Granted, but I could not nor should write aught save those actually related, wherefore those who told them should have told them goodly, and I would have written them goodly. But if folk will even pretend that I'm both the inventor and writer thereof, which I am not, I say that I should not take shame to myself that they were not all alike goodly. For that there's no craftsman living, barring God, who doth everything alike well and completely. Oh my gosh, that was a frickin' mouthful. Thanks, Boccaccio, jeez. Like a human. So yeah, that's the author talking about how he didn't invent all of these stories. He just recorded them for purposes of this book, and it's quite a book. I mean, it's over 1,000 pages, 100 stories. It's quite a book, and you don't really realize how many that is until you're diving headlong into it, you know. But that's it. That's what it is. That's number 100. So that's the Decameron, and we'll go on. Something like that, but we get into some juicy stuff pretty quickly, and I'm several in right now, and so I'll keep making my notes and highlighting my quotes and all that sort of stuff so that I can be prepared to have one of these ready. But that one is number 1, so that's our number 100, counting down, and Sam Harris reading list is counting up, and then there's the bracket for the Disney stuff, and then all the other stuff is just it's just whatever. Anyway, so thank you very much for listening. You can email my webzone at thelastcoffeehouse@gmail.com. You can go on the Facebook page, The Last Coffee House. Tweet at me if you'd like. I never use it. It's at CoffeeChatLCH. And that's it. Thank you very much. Bye.